Good morning. It is the 1st of February and that means it is budget day here in India. And it's no ordinary budget. It is the 10th budget of the Modi government. It's not going to be a full one. It's going to be an interim one because there are elections due in the next couple of months. Will it be a populist, welfareist budget, or will the finance minister be fiscally prudent? Lots of questions to ask, lots of answers to seek. It is the Modi budget before ballot. Remember, this is the final one before we go into polls in April and May. Through the next 3 hours, join CNN News 18 and its stellar team of anchors and experts, economists, who will try and decode for you what are going to be the priorities of Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman as she rises in exactly 3 hours from now at 11 o'clock Indian Standard Time in the Lok Sabha to present the 10th budget of the Modi government. But first, let's bring you up to speed with what is at stake economically and politically for Modi Sarkar. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman all set to table the interim budget of 2024. It will be the last budget of the Modi government 2.0 ahead of the 2024 Lok Sabha elections. Last week, the traditional pre-budget halwa ceremony was held, initiating a lock-in period for officials who are involved in the budget-making process. Of course, the document will be tabled at 11 o'clock today in the Lok Sabha. That's when the contents of it will be revealed. This is the government's second interim budget as it anticipates the general election schedule to happen in April and May. The incoming government will then present the full budget in July. So, what is at stake as far as this 10th budget is concerned for Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, as she rises to present the budget? It comes ahead of the big Lok Sabha election. That, of course, is critical. Whether this budget is going to be electoral in nature, whether it's going to be populist, that is something that we'll have to wait and watch out for. The budget is also likely, remember in 2019, the last budget before the ballot, before the 2019 general election, the big takeaway was the Kisan Samman Nidhi, 6,000 rupees to farmers. Possibly a hike in that. We will see if that happens. On personal taxes, and this is the one thing that middle class India, much of our viewers are interested in, will the finance minister bite the tax bullet, change either rates or tax slabs? The government's projection of growth for fiscal year 24 is at 7%, and that makes India the fastest growing large economy in the world. Inflation used to be a point of concern. Right now, it's within the range of the RBI's scale, as it were. It's at 5.6% in the month of December. The government is also hoping to narrow the fiscal deficit, and that's going to be a challenge. The glide path says 4.5% by 25-26. Can the finance minister stick to the glide path? The challenge, steering growth, making sure that growth is in the high digits, 7% plus, creating jobs, focus on affordable housing. That, of course, is a big electoral plank as well, the PM Awas Yojana. Infrastructure investment. Remember, in 2014-15, when the Modi government came into office, infrastructure spend was a little over 1 lakh crores. Right now, it's 10 lakh crores in the last fiscal. Yes, you could argue that some of it is unspent, some of it has not been implemented, but to try and make sense of what this budget means, is it going to be a political budget? Is there going to be fiscal restraint? We're now going to be joined by the best set of experts in the studio and outside. Here in our studios, consulting editor with Network 18, Rahul Shivshankar, is joining us. Gautam Chikkarmane is vice president with the Observer Research Foundation. Gaurav Chaudhary is consulting editor with Moneycontrol, and we'll also be joined in a moment by Nalin Mehta, the editor of Moneycontrol. Rahul, let me start with you first. What are the three big things that you're going to be watching out for in Nirmala Sitharaman's budget?
Well, Zaka, good morning viewers. Look, we've been talking about this word populism, but for Modi, populism has been more in the exception than the norm. Let's be honest, except for the Kisan Samman Nidhi scheme that was announced with some fanfare. Nothing really giving away in that manner that we have seen in the past. Yes, there has been off-budget expenditure, but that has been deemed necessary. Is there room for populism is perhaps the question that we should be asking fundamentally. How much room is there? And let me just talk you through a few numbers. You talked about the fiscal deficit. it needs to be at least consolidated in this budget to about 5.4% of the GDP by some estimates. Some people say that, look, we're at 5.9%. We need to stay within range so to get to that glide path that you talked about, which is around 4.5% less than 4.5% ideally. Consumption-led growth is a bit of a problem. You can ask anyone and they will tell you that there are huge lacunas on that side of the fence. The government might want to put a positive spin, will throw out some numbers, but not to sound like I'm trying to poop the party, but yes, there is a consumption-led growth deficit, and we have to address that. Revenue expenditure has held steady at about 12%, if I'm not mistaken, of GDP. Many people say the time has come to sort of rein that back, but I don't know. You talked about politics. All that money that is going to be spent on salaries and pensions, etc., can you actually rein them in when opposition governments are going back to the old pension schemes, etc., etc.? So there's a problem area. And of course, there is welfare spending, which is adding to the kitty. So we were just told, for example, on fuel, fertilizer and food, all those numbers are holding steady. They're not going down, they're in fact going up. And that is a fundamental problem. So populism, I don't know. There might be some giveaways to the middle class. There might be a focus on women. Women really need a leg up because, as you know, female labor participation is very low. In fact, India is even lower in that metric than Bangladesh and Pakistan. And unfortunately for us, that number is going down. And many people have said that if you bring more female participation into the economy, you see growth, not exponentially, but certainly you see a lot of growth.
I think it's
a percent
less
or
than
two.
25% the
Yes,
female labor participation
and the number
rate.
is that you get more than a percent and a half if women come in to the economy. So, you're talking about some fundamental numbers, and we'll have to see how those are going to be balanced. It'll be interesting because this is the first budget which gives you a look back 10 years, a decade, and gives you a fair account of how the government is done.
It really is a vote on account. That's what it's called, a vote on account, the interim budget. It's not a full budget. It's also a good time to bring in Gurcharan Das, former CEO of Procter & Gamble, and also Rakesh Nangi, a taxation expert, is with us. Let me bring in Gautam Chikkarmani. Our reporters are also spread across the length and breadth of the national capital before the finance minister first leaves her residence, then goes to Rashtrapati Bhavan, meets the president, and then, of course, the cabinet gives its stamp of approval before she reaches the Lok Sabha. But Gautam Chikkarmani, what is at stake in this budget? Clearly, you have an election coming up in the next couple of months. Nobody can wish that away. No, incumbent government wants to not come across as, okay, we're giving this and this and this for our voter blocks. But at the same time, one of the defining features of this government has been, even during the COVID years, to try and be as fiscally prudent as possible. Is it possible to be prudent in a political year and an election year?
You're probably presuming that this budget will come out with new expenditure or raise new revenues, etc. This is just a vote on account, in my opinion. The best that I see is that Nirmala Sitharaman, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman ji, will talk about the past 10 years of the UPA, of the NDA government.
She might talk about the UPA.
Is that a Freudian slip? Or?
She probably will talk about the UPA, but not in very cheery terms. There'll only be a reference, negative reference benchmark.
And I think the government has done a remarkable job of steering the economy, particularly during the COVID times, due to which the fiscal deficit today stands high. There will be a lot of talk about how this government has steered the economy. There will be numbers, for instance, on digital, on fiscal, on economic growth, and that India is now close to a $4 trillion economy, world's fifth largest, going on third. Some people say it will take 1 or 2 years. I think, to me, it seems in less than 1 year we will become the world's third largest economy. Germany has just crossed Japan. Because Japan, the currency depreciated, so Germany is now the third largest economy, and India will cross that. So all indicators, all celebration, all reforms that the government has done, for instance, GST, IBC, digital, etc., will be talked about as the past. But I also think that she will talk about it will be an election budget, not in terms of sops or giving money here and there, but it will be an election budget in the sense of presenting a vision of what the government proposes to do, what the government hopes to do. Yesterday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, when we return back, it's almost as though they are coming back and,
Are they not?
I really don't know how to read those signals other than accept what he's saying. There will be talk about where the government wants to take, what the economic vision of the government is. They have talked about becoming a developed country, let's say $20,000 per capita income by 2047, which means a $30 trillion economy. So I think all the pathways to that $30 trillion economy, to a $20,000 per capita income, I think she will be talking about. It should be a fairly long budget, but I don't think it will do very much in terms of changing tax rates or in terms of new expenses. It will be a vote on account.
Gaurav, the reason why we're saying that obviously no government can afford to ignore the electorate or what the electorate wants or is looking for. If you go back to the 2019 interim budget, that's when the Kisan Samman Nidhi got announced. And that was a big sort of defining feature of that budget. Whether or not it had an electoral impact, I guess Nalin will be better placed to say. But do you see something of that sort? Do you see an expansion of the Samman Nidhi that's being given to farmers? Do you see, for example, Ayushman Bharat's coverage increasing? What is it that the government, because it needs one big headline out of this budget to go to the people with?
Absolutely, but there's a fundamental difference between 2019 and now. If you look, in the run-up to the 2019 interim budget, the government this party had lost the 3 state elections.
True.
In 2024, when the government is presenting the interim budget, it's riding high on winning those 3 states. So there is no electoral pressure, as it were, for the government to come out with any kind of a scheme, a new scheme for that matter. But so far as the PM Kisan scheme, even if you index it by inflation, I think it's up due for an appraisal. So 2,000 rupees, 6,000 rupees a year. I think even if you index it by inflation, I think a 50% rise is due over a 5-year period. So I would not be surprised if it goes up by to about 9,000 rupees a year for the eligible farmers. But I would expect the finance minister, and I would agree with Gautam, that the government is going to give a very glowing account, a very stirring account of what it has achieved over the last 10 years, particularly how, the progress that the economy has made in terms of various markers, both economic as also socio-economic. But more than that, I think that there will be a very nuanced attempt to actually trying to de-link budget making from long-term policy making. So I expect the finance minister to expend a considerable amount of time talking about Viksit Bharat, and I wouldn't be surprised if Viksit Bharat turns out to be one of the major keywords of a speech. And as the Prime Minister said, they're going to be 4 Amrit pillars, as it were: Gyan, Garib, Yuva, Annadata, and Nari Shakti. So essentially poor, youth, farmers, and women. And the whole idea would be to try and decouple the annual budget making activity from long-term policy making, so that policy making mind space gets freed up from budget making. Right now, all of it is either linked to the electoral calendar or to the annual financial calendar. I think that needs to be freed up, and that is what the Prime Minister has been emphasizing for quite a long time. Viksit Bharat, something I think is going to.
Before I come to Nalin, and we have Gurcharan Das and Rakesh Nangia also joining us, I want to go across to our reporters. Pallavi is joining us from outside the Finance Ministry. I believe Sharon is also there with us, so is Anshul. Pallavi, you are a veteran of covering the Finance Ministry. Tell us what to expect through the course of the next few hours. The minister comes out of her residence. She goes and meets the Rashtrapati. I believe there will be a meeting of the cabinet in Parliament as well, where they will give their approval to the budget. And then, of course, at 11 o'clock in the morning, she will stand up in the Lok Sabha to present the budget. How and why is this different from any of the other budgets that Nirmala Sitharaman has presented so far?
Well, first of all, the good news which really came in for the government yesterday was the GST figures were released, and that was at around 1 crore 72 lakhs. And according to the figures which have been put out by the Finance Ministry, it's the highest, 10.4% growth that they've seen in the GST figures. There have been naysayers about the GST. I think these high figures and the growth essentially gives credence to the government's claim that there's been increased transparency, people are paying those taxes, and there has been a lot of I would say, consumption and therefore demand, and therefore those who say that there has been no economic growth or green shooting on the economy, that's not true. And I think those are the figures which are also going to be rattled off by the finance minister herself. The schedule is very simple. At roughly around 9 a.m. is when she's going to be walking out of the finance ministry. Since late last night, actually, Zaka, as per protocol, everyone goes incommunicado. No officer is going to be speaking. No one is going to be speaking out, because that's the way it goes. So 9 a.m. is when she's going to walk out of her office at North Block along with the entire team. Those pictures have already been put out since late last evening. She then goes to the Rashtrapati Bhavan. She presents the budget's copy first to the Rashtrapati, and then she enters the parliament roughly around 9:50 a.m. to 10 a.m. What happens is, as per protocol, is that the budget has to be cleared by the cabinet. That's a very small procedure. That's a technicality. Once the budget is prepared, she sits for a meeting or a short one with the Prime Minister, and then at 11 a.m. sharp, she comes out with her Bahi Khata, and very quickly, when she just enters the parliament, you're going to see that photo op, something which has made her stand apart. She is the one who introduced the concept of Bahi Khata to make the point that we are overthrowing the colonial legacy. It's all about Indian system. And I think the main focus of the budget, obviously, which everyone has been talking about, is a growth story. Women, of course. I mean, just very interestingly, a day before, the government launched its own program about coming out with a survey which talks about better job opportunities for women, whether it's white collar, whether it's blue collar. And the most important fact which the government is insisting on now is a kind of pay parity, whether it's manual labor, whether it's white collar labor, to make the point, if man and women are working the same kind of a job, there should be no pay discrimination, better facilities, essentially to ensure that a Viksit Bharat, a Sakshat Bharat requires a Nari Shakti. I think this is going to be one main pitch of the finance ministry's vote in account, or the interim budget as it's called.
All right, I think the government's report card yesterday also suggested that there's a 75% increase in the number of women with bank accounts. But what does all of this mean at this point of time, 2 months before a Lok Sabha election? Let me ask Nalin Mehta this. And I think Gaurav referred to the last time there was an interim budget in 2019. The political scenario then was different, because the Modi government had lost 3 assembly elections. There was still, uncertainty over whether they will come back in the 2019 election. This time around, 2023, they've won the 3 heartland states. They are in a politically much more comfortable position. Does that necessarily mean that there will be less populism, welfareism in this budget, or that's not the playbook of the Modi Sarkar?
So, Zaka, I think we all know that with this Modi government, I don't think they're going to take any chances. And I don't think they leave anything. I mean, you just look at what's happened with Nitish Kumar in Bihar, for example. So it doesn't matter how strongly the government is placed before the election vis-a-vis 2019. This is fundamentally an election budget. It's the last one before the elections. So I think we are, at Moneycontrol, for example, we've been looking at, I think the expectation is on 3 or 4 counts. Fundamentally, the first is on welfare. Last time, I think Gaurav mentioned PM Kisan came up, so there could be something around expansion in PM Kisan, possibly, we don't know. The second is around PM Awas, which is one of the signature schemes of the government. There could be something around the urban component of that. I think the third thing is around government capex. The second thing. And the third is around India's energy transformation, which has also been significantly part of the signature themes of the Modi government. Fundamentally, I think Gaurav alluded to this as well, that while this is a vote on account and while this is an interim budget, and the big budget will come after the elections, but if there's one thing we know about the Modi government is that the absolute ruthlessness and not taking anything to chance. And I think what we do expect is that in response to the larger caste census thing, the Prime Minister's idea of 4 castes, women, poor, youth, and farmers, I wouldn't be surprised if the budget is kind of addresses each of these constituencies in at least in the political framing of it. I think you're going to see a litany of achievements of the last 10 years and a vision statement for the term forward, with a few things added at critical points.
All right. So these 4 different and disparate classes of people, there will be a greater focus on them in this budget. Let me bring in Gurcharan Das. Gautam and Gaurav were referring to the headline picture. The headline picture is India is a little over $3.5, almost $4 trillion, expected to get to $5 trillion by the end of 25-26, and by the end of the decade to $7 trillion, and the 3rd largest economy in the world. what does that necessarily mean? How much transformative does that have to be for the ordinary Indian? Because you're looking at what, per capita right now around $2,000 a year. If you were to make a 10x jump from $2,000 to $20,000 a year, what is the transformation that needs to happen, Gurcharan Das?
Well, first of all, let me say that I agree with those people who say this will not be a different sort of budget than the ones that we've had for the last 4 years. You know, I personally feel that the finance minister has done a pretty good job. The infrastructure spending, capex orientation is a growth orientation, job creating orientation in the long term. And it's been done in a fiscally responsible way. Now that has been the hallmark for so why give up a legacy which has yielded you reasonably good growth, made you a high performing economy, and set us on the stage for the long term. Now, for the long term, to get to that developed economy status, you need to grow at 8%. And frankly, that is a disruption because for the last 30 years, the average growth rate for the country since 1991, since the reforms, the economy has grown at close to 7%. That's damn good for a democracy, you know. And we should be proud of that. But why we have failed, what is wrong with that model is that we haven't created the jobs that 7% growth should have created. And that's because we haven't created an industrial revolution. So that is really the most important thing, that you can't just jump from a green revolution to an IT revolution. We have to go through the middle step. Otherwise, how do you take 45% of your people who are in agriculture, surplus, many of them, into higher productivity jobs, higher income jobs? That is to make ourselves a middle class country, which is what developed economy means. We have to do that. And fortunately, the conditions today are far better than they were in 1991. Your infrastructure has improved vastly. The road mileage is doubled since 2011. Port handling capacity has quadrupled since 1991.
Okay.
And others, you know, the whole digital revolution has improved the ease of doing business. So there's a lot going for us to achieve it, but it does need to we have to do the reforms that are required. But as far as coming to the budget today, I would say, well, it's a vote on account. It's an interim budget. There'll be a lot of words, but I don't think there'll be a substantial change from the sensible path that the country has pursued, which is a high capex.
All right.
Deficits under control, meeting deficit targets. Particularly now we are linked, you see, with the bond market, the global bond market. And with that, our sovereign ratings could improve if we are fiscally prudent. Therefore, there has to be an eye on that. And my only big disappointment, let me just before I close, let me say, is privatization. We have done a damn good job of raising taxes. I mean, it is amazing that we have risen in the last 2 decades, from 3 lakh crores to 30 lakh crores, 10 times in terms of revenues the government has achieved. But the failure is privatization. Imagine if you had one more revenue stream to work with. That's the kind of thing that will give you 8% growth. I would have a ministry of disinvestment, have a guy like Shori at the top, and make those people accountable. It's really very sad. The people in charge of disinvest, particularly when the economy is, and the market's hot. So it's a good time to sell.
Yeah, let me take that point to our guests here in the studio. You can take any yardstick, whether it's tax collections, GDP numbers, But there are two bugbears that Mr. Gurcharan Das has pointed. One is jobs, we'll get to that, and privatization. You look at disinvestment numbers, consistently the government has not been able to match the disinvestment numbers. I think the last big one we saw was Air India. But even in today's speech, I don't think she'll be able to match the... What was the target for last year? Was 1 lakh crores plus?
64,000.
64,000 crores. You think she'll be able to match that?
Well, look, Zaka, there is no real point here trying to project. My point here, as I began by saying, was that we can look at the top line numbers and feel extremely happy with things. And, there is a reason. I think most people here would agree that the government has done a fantastic job on cleaning up, the budget numbers. We have more transparency. The banking system is cleaned up. But there have also been, of course, some big misses. You have a jobs problem. You can try going into denial about it. You can say, well, this number and, Mosby numbers are more accurate than that number. But look at what you're doing on the ground. You have increased your food subsidy, or you at least said that we'll continue it for the next 5 years. That's a huge imposition. Why are you doing it? Because there is a need. There is a feedback coming from the ground, and this particular government is very attuned to what people are thinking, and that's why they win elections. So they know that there is a problem there. 40% youth unemployment. You have a huge number of people working in the rural economy, which is exactly what you don't want if you want those 8% growth numbers. Now, why do you have that problem? You have that problem because growth hasn't been equitable. And because of that reason, you find yourself flagging in a key metric, which is consumption. Look, at this moment in time, with the way the global economy is, you're not going to have export-led growth to the point where you could have expected to be 5 or 6 years ago. So you need that consumption. Women are not in the economy in the numbers that you think should be satisfying. Youth are not in the economy. Look at what happened just the other day. The Israeli government says that, look, we need people to work.
Yeah.
And look, you can say that the media is biased, this, that, the other, but when you go to the ground and you ask those people, why are you lining up, risking your lives? They say, what do? We'll die of hunger. So let's be honest. I'm not saying that, look, anyone has a magic wand. And I think what Mr. Modi has done and his government has done is fantastic. They've kept a very clean sheet, really. They've been very tight on the economics. You have a fiscal which is manageable, but there are pressures. You talked and someone talked about us being a democracy which is receptive to, obviously, political pressures. But as a democracy, we've done fantastically. I think Gurcharan Das made the point that as a democracy, we've done fantastically, growing at around 7%, which says a lot. But there are pressures. And sometimes, populism requires you to give in to those pressures. And that can lead to a few complications. And there is, I have enough data here to talk about the complications. But fundamentally, I think that's where the problem really lies.